Check 1, 2, test. Test 1, 2, check.
Good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Is the microphone working so that people can hear? That's good. Thank you for being here. I'm Steve Robinson, president here at Owens, and it's my real pleasure to introduce your presenter today. Before I do that, I want to thank Dean Kathy Ford for all the work in organizing all this stuff, and I think you're in for a really cool experience today. I want to tell you a little bit about Jason Morningstar. Jason is a game designer who lives and works in Durham, North Carolina. He's no stranger to departments of health and nursing, and you'll hear about that, I'm sure. And Jason has been a game designer pretty much his entire life. This is something he's been doing for a very long time. In addition to designing tabletop and live action role-playing games, he's also made games for corporate clients like Google, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He is the author of numerous games, including games that have won awards. One of my personal favorites is a tabletop game called Fiasco, which is a ton of fun to play. His games have been featured at Indiecade and the Gen Con 50th Anniversary Museum. He's been a guest at a variety of events. He's just back and still a little jet-lagged from presenting to the gaming community in Korea. He was a guest at a big gaming convention there, but other gaming conventions like RopeCon, Gen Con, Dragon Con. He was a keynote speaker at the 2016 Living Games Conference, and he helped organize the 2018 event of that same conference. Beyond role-playing, Jason consults on the use of games for teaching and learning, most recently here. We're very excited that he's done that, but he's also been doing this at other higher education institutions like the University of California, the University of Michigan, and at Kaiser Permanente, which I told some students yesterday is like the ProMedica for all of California, right? So Kaiser Permanente is huge. Before I bring Jason up here, I want to tell you that his visit has made me think about simulation and simulated experiences in teaching. And I know that you are all leaders in that. You do an incredible work working with your students simulating healthcare situations. Jason had a chance to go over and tour the Sim Lab, and I know you do it in an interdisciplinary fashion. But it also happens outside of healthcare. You know, in technology, we have trainers that are simulated front ends of computer numerical control machines. We have simulated pneumatic and PLC machines. So a very important part of learning is engaging in simulated experiences. So I'm really excited for Jason to talk to you a bit about this lo-fi lens on simulation, because it's one thing to have hundreds of thousands of dollars of mannequins, but there are also many other great opportunities to do simulation in a more basic way, and that's what Jason's going to talk to us about. And so please help me welcome Jason Morningstar.
Good morning, everybody. Can you still hear me? Okay, good. So before we begin, I want to give a shout out to our friends down in Findlay who are with us electronically, if not in person. So my name, as Dr. Robinson said, is Jason Morningstar. My company is Bully Pulpit Games. And I guess he did a pretty good job of covering who I am and who I've worked with. I want to talk to you about making low-tech games. Quite often when we hear about games, we think about video games, we think about complex or expensive simulation, and that is not what I'm talking about. The things you see on the tables in front of you are the tools that we will use to make games in my world. Index cards and Sharpies and playing cards and pens and paper. Very low-cost elements. You can see a picture here of a game in progress, and it's just pencils and paper and pens. Pretty simple stuff. I'm not going to be talking about theory, either game theory or design theory or educational theory. I hope that's okay. I'm not going to be talking about assessment or outcomes, which I know in your world is an important part of developing these kinds of tools. So I recognize that, but it's not why I'm here. I'm happy to talk about that outside the context of this talk, but this talk is not going to cover that stuff. And, as I said earlier, cheap stuff, fast and cheap and good. Nothing that costs more than $10, which should warm the hearts of administrators everywhere. So my key points here are that small analog games, analog as opposed to digital, are super easy to put together. It's easy to instantiate, to iterate, to create, to experiment with, to throw it at students and see what sticks. They can have a useful place, and you can definitely make your own. And if nothing else, I hope that this talk empowers you to think about ways that you can create more playful interactions with your students. Most of these pictures here are either from University of Michigan Stamps School of Design that had they brought me in to do some medical education game building with them, or from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where I built a particular game that I'll talk about in detail as an example of the method that I'm really encouraging you to think about. So, fast, cheap, or good? Pick any three. The methodology that I'm a big proponent of, a big fan of, allows you to do these things very quickly, to make experiences and games for your students or your staff in a very short amount of time. It doesn't cost anything, and generally it's going to be very engaging, and it's going to accomplish your objectives. So you get all three points of the fast, cheap, good triangle. So there's really 4 words here. We're talking about simulation, and simulation is a huge topic. And simulation, I'll get into this more in a moment, but obviously there are ways to simulate things with very high fidelity, and you're doing some amazing stuff here in your simulation lab, which I just toured this morning, and am in awe of. You have a great lab, a great series of labs. Analog as opposed to digital, and I have to reinforce this because people really are ingrained that the idea of games means sitting in front of a computer or being in a virtual environment or interacting in some digital way, maybe in a synchronous but distributed way like we're doing today, but in a playful context. And I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about sitting around a table or running around the floor of a children's hospital, or in some other pro-social way, interacting with other people in real time, face-to-face. It's cheap and it's iterative, and this is an important point because part of fast and cheap means that you're going to want to continually revise it because you can afford to and you have the time to, and those revisions are going to improve the quality continuously. So here's an important topic that is very relevant to why, to my argument that this is a good use of your time and resources. The fidelity friction ratio is it's a graph that I'll show you in a second, but the idea being that if you want something to be very accurate, there's a lot of friction involved, and that friction might be resources, it might be expertise, it might be time. But it's going to be something. So an extremely high-fidelity patient simulator is an enormously expensive and complicated piece of equipment that needs maintenance, it needs expertise to operate, and it needs a budget to purchase. High fidelity, but it delivers a high-fidelity experience for your student. What I'm talking about is looking for opportunities that are low fidelity and low friction. So here's the chart, right? A computer simulation, a lot of friction. It's going to cost a lot of money. It's going to take a lot of time. It's going to be brittle. In 10 years, it's going to be obsolete. Maybe in 2 years, it's going to be obsolete. The patient simulator, that's a little closer it's a little less fidelity, maybe a little less friction. A computer game, not a lot of realism or fidelity, but also a lot of friction, actually. Analog games way down here. Interestingly, actually doing the thing, you can argue where that's going to fit, but it's always going to be 100% fidelity because you're actually doing the thing. Sometimes actually doing the thing is also very expensive and complicated, in which case that should be, the red dot should be way over here. So it kind of depends on what it is that you're actually doing. If you're actually managing a sewage treatment plant, like we're going to do this afternoon in our other lecture, then that's very expensive and complicated. It's not cheap. Does this make sense? Okay. So I'm going to talk briefly about a game that I made that I think is a really good example of the kind of thing that I'm promoting here. So I'm going to talk about a game that I built for the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill School of Nursing for a particular faculty member who had a particular need related to the pediatric rotation that her students had to do. So the problem that Dr. Diane York approached me with was that she had about an hour in her time with these students on this pediatric rotation to orient them to 5 Children's. And 5 Children's is the floor at UNC Hospital where a lot of sort of medically fragile children are, and where these students were going to be doing their rotation. Traditionally, what she would do is do what I'm doing right now. She would sit them down and say, here are the 110 things you need to know about working on 5 Children's. I want you to remember all these things, and I don't want you to forget them in a blind panic the moment you're surrounded by medically fragile children. And that, for some reason, didn't work. She couldn't figure it out, but the students just blanked as soon as they got in this environment, which was brand new to them. They were young nursing students who had never been exposed to, for the most part, to this population or to the intensity of care that they were being thrust into. And so it became a burden on the staff of 5 Children's to sort of manage these people as well as do their job. And she wanted to fix that. And so the students were freaking out. Dr. York was freaking out, and she came to me and said, is there a way to fix this? And I said, yeah, I think so. I think there is. Let's approach this in a playful way and think about what needs to happen. So what needed to happen was that these students needed some very specific information and skills. They needed an orientation. They needed to know the code to the Pyxis machine. They needed to know where to get a bedpan. They needed to know what to do if a celebrity showed up, because this is the kind of place where famous baseball players come to hang out with the sick children. So like there was a list. She had a very concrete list of things that they needed to be oriented to that were pretty basic. They're not complicated things in the scheme of the profession, but the students were just losing them. They didn't have a sense for the topography of the floor. They didn't know who to turn to. They didn't know who the charge nurses were or where to find them. They forgot the numbers. It was a mess. And our solution, you can kind of see in this little animated GIF here, one of the things that we did, which I'm going to talk about next. So I turned the orientation with the assistance and cooperation of the staff on 5 Children's, which is important. There's a good lesson here. Make sure that the people that are stakeholders are invested in whatever process you come up with. We created it into a treasure hunt. We created tasks that gave the students the things that they needed to know, but in a sort of quasi-competitive environment. So at the beginning of the orientation, we had them all assemble on 5 Children's, and I said, okay, we're going to play a game together. And as soon as I said that, they were like, oh, we're going to play a game? Okay, Morningstar, let's go. And they were very excited. People like to play. Young people like to play. People like to be engaged in different ways. And once I said that, their behavior really changed in interesting ways. So like you can see on one of these, one of the sheets that they were given, you need to get a patient from the patient room B to Dr. Lattimore. You need to grab the chart from patient room B and identify noteworthy trends and voided urine. This stuff was all, had nothing to do with actual patients. It was all on index cards. And they were moving around the space. Many of the tasks referred them to actual practitioners who were on the floor. So the idea here was that I wanted to atomize locations and skills that they were going to need to demonstrate on 5 Children's during the rotation. I made these tasks, put them on color-coded index cards. They were assigned randomly and handed out in dyads. So these nursing students worked in pairs, sometimes triplets, depending on how things worked, but they never worked alone. The idea was that we gave them these tasks and we didn't tell them how to solve the problem. We didn't tell them what order to do the work in. We didn't tell them where to go or how to do it. We just said, this stuff needs to be done, and the team that does it first is going to win something awesome. So they chose what to do and how to do it, and they had to navigate the physical, social, and procedural spaces on the floor. They had to demonstrate their knowledge. They had to reinforce certain necessary skills that the subject matter expert, in this case, Dr. York, had decided were very important. And also, the game was leavened with a little bit of humor. One of the tasks they had was to bring Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson from point A to point B in the way that addressed the protocol of the floor. So, like, there was a celebrity, and they had to handle dealing with the celebrity. And again, this was all happening as an overlay on the actual business of Five Children's. You can see here Dr. York. She's receiving some students' treasure hunt work. And basically, my job in this was to organize the subject matter experts' list of things that they needed to know into an engaging activity. And the hardest part was persuading Five Children's to participate, because it added a little hectic silliness to their day. When the students engaged in this game, they really engaged, and it was very interesting to see. So they kind of forgot that they were in this very stressful environment. They kind of forgot that they were in a place where there were a lot of ill children, because they had these tasks and they had a chance to really focus. And they also, as I'm sure you know, like, these are highly motivated, driven young people who are a little bit competitive, and they really embraced that as well. And the best thing of all is they cheated. They cheated wildly, and I think that's a benchmark of engagement. There are obviously situations where cheating is inappropriate. Something like this, it's not. Something like this, the stakes are very low, and it's much better to see someone active and engaged and finding ways to accomplish the task that you've given them than it is to maintain some decorum. So I was glad to see him cheat. I think this is achievable. I don't think you need someone like me in the box to make this work. I'm not saying you don't need me, but I feel like my value here is to empower you to do things like this. Now, and that means identifying appropriate tasks within your disciplines that would benefit from this kind of an approach, and then trying it out. So what are the problems that cry out for low fidelity, low friction solutions? Often these are tasks that might be related to having some fundamental knowledge of a thing. I think, like, if you needed to memorize bones in the wrist, obviously this kind of thing would work great. If you need to orient someone to a space, it obviously works great. If you need to have somebody get some help in navigating a particular kind of space, either a physical space, a procedural or social space, this is great. Because it takes them sort of out of their heads, abstracts the method of information delivery into a format that's really engaging and fun. Fun being a loaded word, but I think you get the idea. And allows them to play. It allows them to be playful. And there are a number of frameworks which I have a bibliography and a ludography that comes later that includes some frameworks, some academic frameworks for educational games and educational gaming, and it's pretty consistent on this point. So we're definitely gonna try to make some of our own here while we have time together. And what I want you to think about are failing often and failing in ways that are informative. Be quick and dirty about this. Don't try to make things look good. Don't try to make things attractive or informative beyond their utility. You can see some examples here. There's my Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson card. The rest of these, I printed them out on labels, on label cards, and then taped them to index cards. And that way I didn't have to rewrite them when we changed them, as we inevitably did. So the CVAD Care card, right, we did 3 or 4 versions of that. You can see the patient discharge card here. There's some handwritten stuff on that because we learned halfway through one version of this game when we ran it that we needed to make changes. Keep it simple, keep it ugly. There should be no expectation that this is going to be an elegant, attractive, or visually interesting product, because it doesn't have to be. Think about your audience. In many of your cases, that means you're talking about people who are pretty young and are very savvy to this kind of thing, and are probably, frankly, no offense, better at this than you are. So the other piece of advice there, of course, is to incorporate them in the process. And include humor, because this is a playful approach to learning. So if you're putting students in the context of play anyway, then be joyful about it. Be relaxed, be a little silly. Put in Dwayne Johnson. I mentioned cheating earlier. I love cheating. I think it's great. For the kinds of things that I'm doing and encouraging here, I think it's a very useful way to know if people are engaged with your materials. And then continue to iterate, right? So if all your materials are on index cards, it's very easy to create new index cards or to cross things out and change them on the fly. If something's not working, you can adjust it. Maybe you will end up having a final version of whatever the game or activity is that really works very well, and you can repeat it from semester to semester eventually. But I guarantee you'll continue to learn things. If you find a game that is actually working quite well, every time you run it, you'll learn something new. The students will teach you about your game in really good ways. So don't be afraid to iterate, and also to throw stuff out if you need to try different things, to be messy about this. It's a messy process, and in your mind, it should never be completely finished. I think that's probably the best way to approach this. Another important thing is that it's very easy to get into a mindset of sort of as the provider, the idea that you're creating something and then you're sharing it with people. And it's very important that you get feedback, especially on something like this that's kind of amorphous. It's good to say, hey, so we did that thing on 5 Children's. How did it go? What was your feeling about that? Do you feel that that was a good way to absorb that material? Do you feel confident that you got what you needed out of that experience? And the people who are participating, the actual users, will tell you, and you can use that as part of your iteration, right? So don't silo your work or try to make it better without any external input. There's a whole smart room full of people here and a whole smart room full of people in Findlay who, if you decide to try this, you can talk to each other, and offer feedback, test each other's ideas and games. And then, ask students how it went. Again, here's a slide from, I think it's that same game where, there were some notes and more feedback from students, and that just made things better every time we did it. All right. So one of the things we're going to do here is make some games, and I'm excited about that because I love making games. That's what I do all the time. But before we do that, I wanted to see if any of you had questions about what I just was talking about, any piece of that you'd like to discuss. I'm happy to go over in more detail. We can have a conversation before we jump into the next part of this. No questions. Okay. So we're looking for small, obvious problems. Really small, really obvious, really problematic. It's a good trio. Big, complicated problems are not going to work great with this model, and you're certainly not going to be able to create something with your fellows here in a half hour or so. So small things, simple, familiar tools. Often it's good practice to start with an existing game. When I was at University of Michigan, the students were using games like Hanabi and Monopoly and Mancala, and then sort of reskinning those to address particular problems that they had or things that they wanted to teach. There was a beautiful version of Hanabi, which is if you're not familiar with it, it's a game where you have information, but it's hidden from you, but everyone else can see it. So you hold your cards backwards. It's like a card game, but you hold your cards backwards. And they use that as a way to simulate the transmission of information within a hospital. And it worked great. They found a way to sort of make that theme fit their game. So instead of building something from scratch, inventing something out of thin air, they came up with something very obvious and used an existing game. Similarly, like the Five Children's game, I just made a treasure hunt, right? A scavenger hunt. It's not. I didn't innovate in any earth-shaking way. I took things that I knew and that people were familiar with, and that I knew would be interesting and engaging to the users or the students in that case, and used the simple and familiar. I mentioned earlier collaboration and sharing, right? If we're all going to do this together, then we should help each other. You should seek the input of your peers. If even your peers who are not engaged in building low-tech games with you, just walk across the hall and say, hey, what do you think of this? Do you think this is going to work? What's good? What's bad? The things you sort of do anyway. And don't be afraid to fail, because it's, particularly if this is an alien idea to you, and I doubt that it is, honestly, but if you feel some intimidation about the idea of like making a game, please don't. And please enter into this experience with a sort of empty mind and the expectation that you're going to fail, because you probably will, and that's good. It's the first step in iterating towards something that's genuinely interesting and useful. Throw out lots of dumb ideas, because the dumb ideas are the ones that are going to lead to actually smart ideas down the road. And sometimes you'll surprise yourself. Okay, so I have a bibliography and ludography that I'm happy to share. That's kind of a long URL, but I'll make sure that Kathy and Dr. Robinson have this, and we can share it maybe in email or something. Some educational resources related to particular frameworks for game design, a ludography of different games that are useful and interesting examples, or ones that I've participated in. And that's the end of my talk. So thank you. And what I would like to do now, if you're interested, is make some games together. Anybody like to do that? Yes? Maybe? Okay. A little bit of enthusiasm. Not a lot. That's okay. So first of all, this is going to work if we're in groups of 4 or 5. So some of these empty tables we might want to fill up with people. Some of these large groups, you know who you are, should probably split into 2 groups. That would probably be ideal. I'm looking at this table. You guys need to split into 2 groups. Someone needs to join this table over here, back here, maybe split that up. Tables of 4 or 5 are probably ideal. So please reorient yourself if you would. All right. Okay. Thank you for being willing to reorient yourselves. Appreciate it. Looking good? All right. If you look on your table, you'll see there's a bunch of materials there. There's probably some Post-it notes, some cards, index cards, Sharpies, a deck of cards, some pens, some paper. We're still reorienting? Okay. And I see Kathy's moving some stuff around, getting more supplies out. This is good. Cool.
You're so pushing us outside our comfort zone.
Good. Yeah, I can tell. I can feel.
Like I was thinking, if we just think of problems like with hip-hop.
Hey, everybody. Can I bring you back to my attention for a moment, please? Hey, everybody. Can we talk as one to many for a second? I can see we're all excited. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. Can I talk for a moment before we jump into our games? I'm very excited that you're very excited. And I want to make sure that you are diving into the process of thinking about games that you might want to invent. So that's cool. I'm going to throw out some suggestions. This is your time to do what you like. One thing that might be really fruitful would be to collaborate, brainstorm, think about a particular problem that each of you has, and then choose one to work on. That's probably a good model. Maybe you want to each make your own. That's fine too. Kathy suggested that I give an example. So let's think about HIPAA. What if you were going to make a game about HIPAA compliance or some aspect of that? What if you made a game that had one person being the person who's the guardian of protected information, and the other people or the other player being someone who is trying to get them to slip up? There's an example. And so maybe every index card is a question that may or may not be appropriate for them to answer. That's the level of complexity that we're looking for here, right? That's something that two students could play. We talked about it in the lab earlier about having ringers come in during the middle of intense exercises and trying to get them to slip up and give away protected information. So think about things like that. That would be something that you might do. Did you have other thoughts, Kathy?
No, I just thought maybe an example like that, and that was something that applied to everyone.
Right, yeah.
My thought process when we were watching the nursing simulation today, that we were talking about was the first and second semester students will easily slip up.
Right.
That's what the third semester they had.
That's right. So early in their education, it was easy to trick them, and by the time they were ready to go, they were bulletproof. Awesome. All right, so start making some games. Think about the ideas, and I'm going to come around and visit with you. Hey everybody, I'm going to keep the pressure on. We're going to keep the pressure on. I want you to think about the games that you're developing as something that you can share with another table. We're going to test each other's games, and I'm going to play them all because I love games. So keep developing them, but in maybe 5 or 10 minutes, we're going to show them off to each other. in another 5 minutes or so, we'll share our ideas. Hopefully we can play them. All right, everybody, it's a time to give pitches for our games. So somebody at your table is going to share with the group what your game's about and sort of how it works. Your games don't need to be done yet, but you have a pretty good idea at this point of what it's going to be like and what it's going to look like. So inspire the rest of us, tell us what it's like, and we will start at this table over here.
Communication skill, and that student
Excellent. Very next. I'm going to pass this microphone around. So someone at this table will, who's our, oh, I see how it is. All right. No pressure.
Okay, we currently have a lab station about sterile technique and recognizing breaks in sterile technique. That's not very interactive, it's a poster board. So we were thinking of making that poster board into kind of a live presentation amongst the students. So we have a couple of actions that a student would draw a card that would have an action about sterile technique. And then the rest of the group who's participating in the game would have a stack of cards about evaluation of what went wrong during that presentation. And then they need to find a way to resolve the error without failing their checkoff or failing the scenario. So one of the examples that we have is that once they have sterile gloves on, they push their hair back out of their eyes, and the other students would need to recognize that that was a break in sterile technique, that they contaminated their gloves, and the way to fix it would just be obtaining new gloves rather than giving up on the whole checkoff and I already failed. So just making it more of a participation process than observing pictures on a poster board.
That's fantastic. I saw a member of your group run out too. Okay, we'll come back to you. How about this table on the end? We'll go this way.
All right, so something we identified as an issue is time management with students. So this game would be geared towards first semester students, where there's a series of questions on these cards we came up with, and we wrote like Ace of Hearts or King of Diamonds, and so they would draw a card and then find the question that they would answer. So some of these questions is, give an example of what would happen if your car wouldn't start in the morning. How would you troubleshoot that? And you have clinical at 6:30. If you're a visual, auditory, or kinesthetic learner, how would that impact your study habits? How do you manage your normal morning routine? One of the questions was, if you have small children at home, would you do your homework at the same time as them? Why or why not? Those kinds of questions. So to get the dialogue going and a little bit of a game with them pulling the card.
That's great.
Okay, we are coming from the medical assisting perspective, and we started talking about games that we enjoy playing outside of work, and some issues that we come across from a student perspective, and one of those is learning how to talk to your patient and hear what they say and take what they say and what has to make it in the chart from, picking and pulling from their conversation. Two of the games that we have really enjoyed playing are Battleship and Clue, and Scrabble as well. So we pulled our ideas from that. It's a kind of a patient assessment battleship, where we have one patient on one side who is also the medical assistant, and then another on the other. We have our board game set up into quadrants, and we are given diseases with cards listing symptoms of those. So I can see what diseases we're playing with on my side, and the other student can ask me questions, and I can answer accordingly, and they're trying to figure out, how to diagnose my disease on the board. So that's what we came up with, basically how to talk to patients and hear what they say. So.
That's great, and I love the idea of recontextualizing an existing game. Is it going to be you, Brad? Are you going to be the spokesperson?
I don't know. I just kind of stood up there, I guess. So we decided that we were going to do orientation around the campus because a lot of our students always come and ask us, where is Ozone? Or OSER? Where is Financial Aid? Where is this? Where is that? So we came up that Batman was going to chase the Riddler through our campus. So They're going to start off, and we have a whole scenario where they're told that Batman, the Riddler, give Batman the slip for another time, and there was a riddle that was left for him, and the last seen place was in Veterans Hall. So when they get to Veterans Hall, there's another clue, because Batman thought he was going to find a Riddler, but he didn't. But he found another riddle, and the answer is in the Zen part of it. Oh, no, I'm holding it. Sorry. But it says, for those looking for meditation but do not want to take medication, go to those who serve to counsel. The answer is in the Zen. They have a Zen garden, so then we were going to write in the sand the answer to the next question. So then they have another, so they would find that riddle, then the riddle that would take them to the other place is, when you are falling behind and credits are lacking, who should you see to keep from slacking? Anybody know? Misha. Exactly, right? So you want Kathy on your team.
Right.
Okay? And then we have them all we have riddles for all of them for counseling, advising, Kathy's office, library, OSERV, computer lab in Bicentennial Hall, Fireside Grill, Shack, student activities, and the main faculty offices of your program. And that's what we did. And then when you finally get there, we were going to project the Riddler up on the screen so they knew that they finally caught him.
Yeah. There you go. All right, who's the spokesperson here? Oh, we volunteered you, Teresa.
Okay, you cheated. That's exactly what we were going to do.
No, it's cheating is good.
No, but we did have the same thing and kind of made it generalized. When you do an orientation for all, no matter what program you're in, to find out where things are, where to navigate OCC from where the map is to our class schedule, academic calendar. And we went from the thought of all the questions we get from students all the time. When do we drop a class? When do we add a class? When's printing? Where do you go if you run out of printing, actually? But we would do cards with all the questions, put people in teams so they could introduce and get to know one another, which is a good icebreaker. And then have the cards where they have to do a scavenger hunt on exactly from the curriculum, where do I find books? It's just common questions we get when students first start coming to class anyway. The books, we know where they can go find the books, but we always get, where do I get my book? Or what book are we using this semester? I get that all the time. So it's just to help the students and really help us.
Sure.
So navigate Owens, yeah.
I think that's quite different. You've come up with different solutions
Well, his
to the
is
same
more
problem.
creative. Yours is definitely more creative. Yours is fun. Ours is just,
That's great. Thank you. Okay. Are you the spokesperson for this team, Cece? Okay.
All right. Ours was on teaching math, and I have found students struggle with setting up the IV pumps when they have to do an IV piggyback or a drip. So we came up with, if we gave them a little scenario, how do they figure out using the pump? Well, then it was suggested to us we could throw another dimension in there and add a med to it, so they also have to have knowledge of the medication that they're given as well. So what we did was we gave, if the patient's potassium level came back this morning as 3.1, and the standing order reads to give potassium 20 milliequivalents for a potassium level of 3.1 to 3.2 and 10 milliequivalents for a potassium level of 3.2 to 3.3. First off, they had to figure out how much potassium they had to give. And then we made up cards. So we made it like a race. So whoever comes up with the solution first. So we made up cards. One says 10, one says 20. So they have to figure out how much they can give. For those of you who don't know, you can only give 10 milliequivalents over an hour. So if they pick the 20, that would be incorrect. And then we have like 3 options of how much solution that they're going to give at a time. They have to figure out how much time to give it over, so whether they're doing it in 15 minutes, 30 minutes, or over an hour. And then what would be the proper calculation to put into the pump. So That was our theme.
That's good. Thank you so much. I'm so impressed. These games are all really good starts. What do they have in common? What are the things that, when you heard other tables presenting, were sort of common themes? Not in terms of the content, but in terms of the delivery. What kinds of things did we see? I'm sorry? Fun. They were fun, okay. Anything else? Yeah, absolutely. All of these, I think, would be really interesting ways for students to interact with these materials. Something else that I saw is that you all took to heart the idea of making something very simple and that is a problem that is directly actionable. Each of these seems to solve something that you could define very clearly, a very straightforward, simple problem, which is really great because it seems to me that you're taking to heart kind of the approach I'm recommending here. Each of these is a perfectly great idea that you could expand on and actually implement. They're almost ready. In each of these cases, a little more work, not a lot, and you'd be ready to show this to somebody, show this to your peers outside of this room, or to students. Put it in front of some students and say, hey, what do you think? Could you do this? Let's try it. Let's do some math. Let's run the campus and see if we can what do you think a new student's experience would be with this? With each of these games, you could clearly do that.
Sorry, just a quick question. Do you find that it is more engaging to have a simple game, but there's not necessarily a winner or loser where you've got someone who comes out on top? Do they tend to want to participate more if you've got a prize at the end of it?
That's a great question. To some degree, it depends on the cohort, the users. If you know that they're competitive people, then even a sort of a fictive win condition can be very engaging and exciting. I'm going to talk about that more this afternoon in my game design talk. You have to be really careful if you do that because it's pretty easy to design a game that also alienates people for whom that is not appealing. And there are people who just don't want to compete, and as soon as you introduce explicit competition, they shut down. And so it takes sort of a careful balance and really sort of knowing your cohort to decide whether that's the right approach or not. For some, it's absolutely the right approach, and if you've got a group of nursing students who are all cutthroat and ready to roll, that's the best. But if there's even one of those people who you know is not going to react well to that, then it's probably explicit competition with a reward at the end may not be the right approach. A little competition is always okay, but if it becomes very very intense, then you need to know your folks. But thank you for that question. Other questions or thoughts about this?
What do you do with the students that don't necessarily like games, and their comment is to you that I paid tuition for you to teach me, and now we're coming here and we're playing games?
I think that's a legitimate question for a student to ask. I guess the response to that would be, my job is to deliver this material, right? And I've delivered it to you. If you engage with the activity, then you learned what I wanted to teach you. That's certainly my approach to that. At the same time, I can easily see circumstances where this approach just doesn't work with certain kinds of learners. And if you encounter that, then you need to be prepared to accommodate that. And I think it's pretty easy to accommodate because you still have I'm going to just tell you the things you need to know approach for any of these issues, for the most part. Like the math one, maybe not so much, but certainly with an orientation kind of thing or with some of these games, it would be very easy to say, I recognize that this is not working for you, this is not a successful approach, here's the same information in bullet points on a piece of paper. And if that's what that student needs their learning style is going to accommodate that better, I think that's fine and worth being prepared for. Other questions or thoughts about this? I'm interested in your reaction to this as an exercise. I was really pleased to see you jump right in. As soon as I sort of stopped talking, people were already sort of strategizing and thinking, which is usually a good sign. I hope that you'll carry through with these or think about this approach when you encounter these small, easy to address problems in your disciplines and practices. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.